"You're not invited," the billionaire's fiancé told the maid. Seconds later, the maid's toddler ruined the entire wedding. Hey, stop scrolling for a second. Because what I'm about to tell you, it happened at one of the most expensive weddings ever planned. Billionaire. A stunning fiancé. A venue that cost more than most people make in a lifetime. And one tiny little girl, 3 years old, in a wrinkled dress, holding a yellow flower she'd picked from the garden herself. Nobody invited her. In fact, the fiancé looked that child's mother straight in the eyes and said, "You're not invited." Cold. Final. No apology. But here's the thing nobody saw coming. That little girl walked into that wedding anyway. And in less than 60 seconds, she didn't just interrupt the ceremony. She unraveled everything. The vows. The lies. The secrets that powerful people had buried for years. Stay with me. Because the truth behind this story will shatter you, and then put you back together again. Hey beautiful people. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, I'm so glad you found us. We tell stories that feel like life because they are. Real emotions. Real moments. Real humanity. Before we dive in, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like this move you, touch your heart, or make you feel less alone, hit that subscribe button. We're building something beautiful here, one story at a time. Let's go back to the beginning. Some people are born into gold. Others are born to polish it. The Harrington estate sat at the top of Callaway Hill like a crown that had forgotten it was just metal. From the street below, ordinary people would slow their cars. Not because of the iron gates or the sculpted hedges or the fountain that ran even in winter, but because of something harder to name. Some feeling that the world up there operated by different rules. That the air itself cost something most people couldn't afford. Marcus Harrington had inherited the estate at 22, after his father's private jet went down over the Atlantic. By 25, he had tripled the family's net worth. By 30, he was the kind of man whose name appeared in newspapers before anything had even happened, just because his presence alone made things happen. He was 32 now. Dark eyes. Quiet confidence. The kind of man who never raised his voice because he'd never needed to. He was also, as of 6 months ago, engaged to Vivian Callaway. And Vivian. God, where do you even start with Vivian? She was 29 years old and beautiful in a way that felt intentional. Like every angle of her face had been approved by committee. Her laugh was perfectly timed. Her wardrobe was immaculate. Her Instagram had 4.2 million followers who called her aspirational, ethereal goals. She had come into Marcus's life at a charity gala. Of course she had. Wearing a red dress and carrying a glass of champagne she barely touched. Marcus had been drawn to her precision. Her control. He'd mistaken it for strength. That mistake would cost him everything. But we'll get to that. Down at the base of Callaway Hill, on a street where the houses leaned slightly, where laundry dried on lines between windows, where children drew on sidewalks with broken chalk, lived a woman named Rosa. Rosa Mendez was 31 years old, though she looked older some mornings. Not because life had broken her, but because she had carried so much of it on her own. She had come to work at the Harrington estate 3 years ago as part of the household staff. Cleaning, organizing, occasionally helping with catering when the family hosted events. She was quiet, efficient, invisible in the way that certain people are trained to be invisible in certain spaces. She was also a mother. Her daughter's name was Lily. Lily was 3 years old, with enormous brown eyes and 2 braids that Rosa tied every morning with whatever ribbon she could find. Lily called everything mine. The cat next door, the clouds, the moon. She laughed with her whole body. She cried the same way. On weekdays, Lily stayed with Rosa's neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Osei, while Rosa worked. But on weekends, when the estate was quieter, Rosa sometimes brought Lily with her. Marcus had never objected. He'd actually smiled once, A real one, not the boardroom kind, when Lily had tugged on his jacket and asked him why his house was so enormous. "I ask myself the same thing," he'd said. Vivian had not smiled. She'd watched the child the way people watch something they intend to remove. It was on a Tuesday, 14 days before the wedding, that Vivian called Rosa into the sitting room. Rosa came in, hands folded, expression neutral. She was used to instructions, flower arrangements, guest preferences, dietary restrictions. She was not used to what came next. Vivian didn't look up from her phone immediately. She let the silence stretch, something she did deliberately, Rosa had noticed. A small power move dressed up as distraction. Then she looked up, smiled the smile that never reached her eyes. "The wedding is on the 14th, Vivian said. "The entire staff will be working. Long day. Very formal. Very structured." Rosa nodded. "Of course. I'll be here by 6 a.m. "Yes," Vivian said. "You will. But your daughter won't." Rosa blinked. "I'm sorry." "The child." "Lily." Vivian said the name like it was a word in a language she found unpleasant. "She's a distraction. She's unpredictable. She tilted her head. "Not appropriate for an event of this caliber. She stays with my neighbor on weekdays." "I don't care about your arrangements," Vivian said, tone sharpening just slightly, just enough. "The wedding is on a Saturday. I know you sometimes bring her on weekends. I'm telling you, don't. She is not invited. She is not welcome. Do you understand?" Rosa stood very still. She wanted to say something. She felt something rise in her chest. Not anger exactly, but something close. Something that had a name she was too tired to speak out loud. Instead she nodded. "Understood." She turned and walked out. She didn't cry until she reached the hallway. Have you ever been made to feel invisible in a place where you gave everything? Have you ever been spoken to like your life, your child's life, was simply an inconvenience to someone else's perfect day? Hold on to that feeling. Because this story is only just beginning. The people who clean the rooms always know where the secrets are buried. In the days that followed, Rosa moved through the estate like a ghost with a mop. She polished the floors of the grand ballroom where the reception would be held. She pressed the linen tablecloths, 200 of them, until every crease surrendered. She arranged ivory candles in crystal holders and placed them down the center of tables so long they seemed to stretch into the distance. She did all of this beautifully, professionally, without complaint. And as she worked, she noticed things. Rosa had always been a noticer. It was perhaps an occupational condition. When you move quietly through other people's lives, when you are part of the furniture in rooms where important conversations happen, you absorb information simply by existing. She noticed the way Vivian spoke differently on the phone when she thought no one was near. Not the polished, articulate Vivian who charmed donors at fundraisers. Different voice. Faster. Lower. Edged with something Rosa couldn't immediately identify. She noticed the black car that parked at the end of the estate service road 3 times in 2 weeks. Different plates each time, but the same car, she was sure of it. Dark windows. Engine running. Never quite leaving. She noticed the man. He came once on a Thursday to the side entrance that the delivery people used. He was tall, mid-40s, wearing clothes that were expensive but rumpled. The kind of man who once cared about appearance and had since stopped. He had Vivian's same jawline. Her same eyes, though darker. He stayed for 12 minutes. When he left, Vivian stood in the corridor for a long moment with her back to the wall and her eyes closed. Her hands were shaking. Then she smoothed her blazer, fixed her expression, walked back into the main house like nothing had happened. Rosa said nothing. She never did. But she remembered. Meanwhile, Marcus was doing what Marcus always did in the weeks before a major event. He disappeared into work. Not physically. He was present at dinners, at planning meetings, at the venue walk through that Vivian had scheduled with military precision. He nodded at the right times, proved the menu, confirmed the guest list. 412 names, each one vetted by Vivian's assistant. But his mind was somewhere else. He'd been quieter lately. Even his closest friend, a man named Daniel, his college roommate turned CFO, had noticed. "You nervous?" Daniel had asked, clapping him on the shoulder after a board meeting. Marcus had smiled. "Should I be? Every groom is. I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He just didn't have language for what he was feeling yet. It was a kind of low hum in the back of his chest. Not doubt exactly, but its quieter cousin. A sense that something important was slightly out of alignment. Like a painting hung a single degree crooked on a wall. Nothing you could prove. Just something you kept glancing back at. He tried to talk to Vivian about it once. Gently. Over dinner. "Do you ever feel like we rushed into this?" he'd asked. She'd set down her fork. Looked at him with those precise, beautiful eyes. "Do you want to unrush it?" she'd asked. "I didn't say that." "Good." She picked her fork back up. "Because the invitations are already sent." That was the end of that conversation. Rosa was cleaning the upstairs study, a room Marcus used as a private library, when she found the photograph. It had slipped behind the radiator, probably during the deep clean the week before. An old photo, slightly faded. A woman holding a baby. The woman was young, maybe 22, 23. Dark hair. Wide smile. Something terribly familiar about her face. Rosa turned the photo over. On the back, in faded ink, 2 words. Lena. 2014. Rosa placed the photo on the desk where Marcus would find it. She didn't think much of it then. Later, she would think about almost nothing else. On the Thursday before the wedding, Rosa came home to find Lily sitting on the front step with Mrs. O'Shea waiting. Lily jumped up the moment she saw her mother. Arms out, full body launch, and Rosa caught her, held her tight, pressed her face into those little braids. "Mama," Lily announced seriously, pulling back to look at her face. "I drawed a picture." "Drew," Rosa said softly. "Drew," Lily repeated, satisfied. She thrust a folded piece of paper into Rosa's hand. Rosa opened it carefully. Crayon drawing. A house, enormous with too many windows. A sun in the corner with a face. And 2 figures in front. One tall, one tiny. Holding hands. "That's us," Lily said. "At the big house." Rosa's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, baby," she whispered. "Can I come with you Saturday?" Lily asked. "To the party?" Rosa looked at her daughter's face. All hope and innocence in those enormous brown eyes, and felt something fracture quietly inside her. "We'll see," she said. It was the only answer she had. What would you have done? If someone looked at your child, your whole world, and told you they weren't welcome somewhere you worked every single day? Keep watching. Because what happens next is the moment everything changes. Some days arrive wearing the costume of ordinary mornings. They are not ordinary at all. The 14th came in dressed like a fairy tale. The sky over Callaway Hill was the specific shade of blue that only appears a handful of times a year. Deep and clear and endless, the kind of blue that makes you believe briefly that everything is going to be all right. The estate had been transformed overnight. White roses and eucalyptus cascaded from every archway. Silk ribbons threaded through iron railings. String lights, though they wouldn't glow until evening, draped like sleeping stars across the garden. 412 guests were expected. 72 staff members were already in motion. Rosa arrived at 5:45 a.m. She had arranged everything for Lily's day at Mrs. O'Shea's. Extra snacks, the stuffed rabbit Lily couldn't sleep without, careful instructions about the afternoon nap. She had kissed her daughter's sleeping face in the dark and whispered something she didn't have words for. She arrived dry-eyed. Professional. Ready. By 8 a.m., the house smelled like flowers and expensive perfume and the particular tension that precedes large formal events, like the air itself was holding its breath. Vivian's dressing room was on the second floor. 3 attendants. A stylist who'd flown in from Paris. A makeup artist whose clients included royalty. And Vivian herself in the center of it all, draped in silk, perfectly still. Rosa brought up fresh towels and a tray of mineral water. Vivian looked at her in the mirror. "Daughter's not here," she said. "Not a question. Check." "No," Rosa said. "She's at home." "Good." Rosa set down the tray and left. She stood in the hallway for a moment, hand against the wall. Then she straightened up and went back to work. What nobody knew, what Rosa herself didn't know yet, was what was happening on the other side of the city. Mrs. O'Shea had woken that morning with a fever. Not severe, but enough. Enough that by 9 a.m., when she tried to sit up to make Lily breakfast, she lay back down again with the ceiling spinning. She called Rosa's phone. Rosa's phone was on silent in her apron pocket, buried under the noise of 412 people's worth of final preparations. Mrs. O'Shea called twice more. Then she called her own daughter, who lived 40 minutes away and could not come until the afternoon. She looked at Lily, sitting on the kitchen floor in her pajamas, eating crackers and talking earnestly to her stuffed rabbit. "Sweetheart," Mrs. O'Shea said carefully, "we're going to take a little trip." Rosa didn't find out any of this until later. What she knew, in real time, was that at 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, with every guest seated and the string quartet playing and Marcus standing at the altar with the particular stillness of a man trying to outrun his own heartbeat, she heard a sound. Small feet. Running. And then a voice. A 3-year-old's voice, carrying effortlessly across a garden gone silent. "Mama!" Rosa turned. And there was Lily. Wrinkled dress. The yellow one with the daisies, the one Rosa had specifically not packed for today. Hair half braided, one ribbon missing. Holding a flower she had clearly pulled from someone's front garden on the way in. She had spotted Rosa from across the garden and was now running toward her with her arms open and her whole face lit up like everything in the world was exactly right. Rosa felt 3 things simultaneously. Terror, relief, and a love so fierce it was almost indistinguishable from pain. She moved toward Lily quickly, scooped her up. "How did you? Where is Mrs. O'Shea?" "She's sick," Lily said simply. "So we come in a taxi." Rosa looked up. Mrs. O'Shea was standing at the garden entrance, pale and apologetic, wrapped in a cardigan despite the warmth. She'd come herself. Course she had. 412 people had turned to look. And at the altar, Marcus Harrington, 32 years old billionaire man who never showed surprise, was staring at the little girl in Rosa's arms with an expression nobody had ever seen on his face before. But that wasn't the moment that changed everything. This was. Lily, still in Rosa's arms, turned to look at the altar. Looked at Marcus with her enormous brown eyes. And then, with the absolute certainty of a child who doesn't yet know the rules, she pointed at him. "That's the nice man," she told her mother. "From the picture." Rosa froze. "What picture, baby?" Lily reached into the pocket of her wrinkled daisy dress, because 3-year-olds put everything in their pockets, and pulled out a small faded photograph. The one Rosa had placed on Marcus's desk. The one of a woman named Elena, holding a baby. The one dated 2014. Rosa had never shown it to Lily. But Lily had found it on the desk the one afternoon Rosa had briefly brought her to the estate. And she had kept it. 'Cause she kept everything. Rosa stared at the photo. Then she looked up at Marcus. Marcus had gone completely still. Because he was staring at the photo in the child's hand. And something in his face had cracked open in a way that had nothing to do with the wedding, the guests, the flowers, or Vivian. "Where did you get that?" he said. And his voice was barely a voice at all. "Did you feel that? That moment when something small, impossibly small, reaches into the center of everything and pulls the thread that unravels the whole fabric. We're only halfway through. And the truth, the real truth, is still buried. Stay with me. Secrets don't die. They just wait for the right child to carry them into the light. The string quartet had stopped playing. Nobody had told them to. They simply stopped, the way music sometimes stops when the room it's in changes into a different kind of room entirely. 412 people sat in a garden that had gone completely, profoundly silent. Vivian stood at the entrance to the aisle. She had not yet walked. She was 30 seconds from making her entrance when Lily's voice split the quiet. Now she stood frozen in her silk gown, her bouquet of white roses in white-knuckled hands, staring at the scene unfolding at the altar. Marcus had stepped down from the raised platform. He walked toward Rosa and Lily, not fast, not slow, with the focused calm of a man navigating something his body understood before his mind did. He crouched down to Lily's level. "Can I see that?" he asked gently. Lily considered him for a moment with the solemn seriousness of someone who takes lending things very seriously. Then she held out the photograph. Marcus took it. His hands, these hands that signed billion-dollar contracts without trembling, were not steady. He turned the photo over. "Read the 2 words on the back. Lena. 2014. He stood up slowly. "Rosa," he said quietly, "where did you find this?" "Behind the radiator in the study," she said. "It must have fallen. I left it on your desk." "And she?" He glanced at Lily. "She must have taken it," Rosa said, face flushing. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "No." He shook his head. "No, don't apologize." He looked at the photo for another long moment. Then he looked up, past Rosa, past the guests, all the way to where Vivian stood frozen at the aisle entrance. And the look on his face was not anger. It was recognition. The slow, terrible recognition of someone who has just realized that a question they stopped asking years ago has been quietly answering itself without them. "Let me tell you about Elena." Marcus had loved her when he was 24. Deeply, privately, in the way young people love before the world teaches them to be careful about it. She was an artist. She painted in a studio above a bakery, and she smelled like turpentine and cinnamon, and she laughed at things that weren't supposed to be funny and made you feel like the world was larger than you'd been told. She had also been, for a brief and terrible season, involved with the Calloway family. Not Marcus. He didn't know that part at the time. Vivian's family. Her father specifically, Gerald Calloway, who collected beautiful things the way other people collected regrets. Who had been married twice and unfaithful always. Who had met Elena at one of the charity events that wealthy families use to launder their public image. Marcus had found out about Gerald and Elena when the relationship was already over. Elena had ended it, quietly, and disappeared from the social circuit entirely. Marcus, heartbroken and proud in equal measure, had not tried to find her. He had eventually moved on, thrown himself into work. Met Vivian at a gala. Vivian Calloway, Gerald's daughter. A coincidence he'd filed away as the universe's darkly comic sense of humor. He had never asked too many questions about Elena. Never wanted to. Till now. Because the baby in the photograph, the baby in Elena's arms, dated 2014, would be approximately 12 years old today. And Marcus was staring at that baby's face, and something at the base of his skull was humming with a frequency he had no name for yet. Marcus. Vivian's voice. She had walked down the aisle. Not her planned entrance, not the music, not the photographer's signal. She had simply walked forward because she had no other choice. Her face was composed. Her voice was level. But her eyes, her precise, controlled, committee-approved eyes, were afraid. "Sweetheart," she said, placing a hand on his arm. "The guests are waiting. This isn't the time." "Whose baby is this?" Marcus asked, quietly, conversationally. like a man asking for the weather. The silence in the garden deepened. What? In this photograph, Elena is holding a baby. Whose baby? Marcus, I don't know what you're. Vivian. One word. That was all. But something in the way he said her name, all the boardroom calm, all that quiet that had always been his power, made her take a small step backward. We should talk privately, she said. We should talk now, he said. And from the front row where the family seats were, where Gerald Calloway himself sat in a morning suit, 70 years old and suddenly looking every single year of it, came a sound. A sharp intake of breath. Marcus looked at him. Gerald Calloway looked back. And in the space between those two looks, everything that had been buried for 12 years surfaced like something that had been holding its breath underwater for too long. Have you ever been standing at the altar of something, a decision, a relationship, a life you thought you wanted, and felt the floor shift? That sick, clarifying moment when the truth walks in without an invitation. There are 2 more sections. And the truth is only just beginning to breathe. The most powerful thing a child can do is exist. What came out in the next 11 minutes would be talked about, in whispers, in drawing rooms, in gossip columns and family therapy sessions, for years. Came out in pieces. The way truths always do when they've been held in too long. Jagged. Non-linear. Stopping and starting like something learning how to walk. Gerald Calloway had known about Elena's baby. He had, in fact, paid for Elena's silence. Not in the crude, explicit way that gets men dragged through courtrooms. In the elegant, deniable way that wealthy families manage inconveniences. A trust fund established in a shell company. Monthly deposits. An agreement, if you could call something signed under duress an agreement, that Elena would raise the child privately. Away from the Calloway name. Away from any claim. The child was Gerald's son, named Thomas, living quietly with Elena in a city 300 miles away, where Elena had rebuilt her life and her art and her dignity. But here is the part that Marcus hadn't known. The part that Vivian had known, had always known, and had never told him. 12 years ago, Elena had also been involved with Marcus. Briefly, painfully, overlapping at the edges with her entanglement with Gerald. She had ended things with Marcus before she knew she was pregnant, and she had never, in the chaos and fear and pressure of what followed, been certain whose child she carried. She had suspected Gerald. The timing aligned more cleanly, but she had never confirmed it. And Vivian, who had been 22 at the time and sharp as a blade, and already managing her father's vulnerabilities like a small, cold-eyed accountant, had known all of this. She had known when she met Marcus at the gala. She had known when he fell for her. She had orchestrated every step of it, not out of love but out of the particular kind of control that some people mistake for love. If Marcus was attached to the Calloway family, he would never dig into the Calloway family's secrets. If he was the fiancé's husband, he was neutralized. None of this came from Vivian's mouth. She stood at that altar in her silk gown and said nothing. Said nothing while her face performed a series of expressions that her voice couldn't sustain. Came from Daniel, Marcus's CFO, his college roommate, the man who'd clapped him on the shoulder and asked if he was nervous. Daniel had known too, or had suspected enough to hire someone 3 weeks ago, when his own unease about Vivian had finally outgrown his loyalty to staying out of it. He had said nothing because he had no proof. He had said nothing because Marcus hadn't asked. He had said nothing because sometimes friendship means waiting until the moment when silence would be a different kind of betrayal. He stood up from his seat in the second row. His voice was steady. His hands were not. He spoke for 4 minutes. The garden listened. Rosa stood to the side, holding Lily, who had grown bored of the adult drama and was now studying a beetle she'd found on the ground with the complete absorption that only 3-year-olds can manage. Rosa hadn't meant for any of this to happen. She hadn't known what the photograph meant. She hadn't known the beetle trail of connections that led from one small faded picture to a secret that had been running silently beneath this family for more than a decade. She had simply cleaned rooms, noticed things, left a photo on a desk. And her daughter, her brilliant, curious, rule-blind daughter, had done what 3-year-olds do. She had carried it in her pocket. She had brought it to the party she wasn't invited to. She had given it to the nice man. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't cry. Not in front of 412 people. He was quiet for a long time. Then he turned to the officiant, a kind man in his 60s who looked like he very much wished he was somewhere else, and said, "I think we need to reschedule." The officiant nodded with the quiet relief of someone who had been hoping someone would say exactly that. Vivian made one last attempt. She reached for his hand. "Marcus, don't." Not angry. Not cruel. Just finally completely clear. "Please tell your father I'll be in touch with my legal team on Monday." He stepped away from the altar. He walked back toward Rosa, who was still holding Lily, who had now abandoned the beetle and was looking up at Marcus with those enormous eyes. Marcus crouched down. Eye level with a 3-year-old in a yellow daisy dress. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily," she said. "That's a beautiful name." "I know," Lily said. Marcus laughed. "Real one. The kind that comes from somewhere unguarded." "Thank you, Lily," he said softly. Lily considered this. Then she held out the flower she'd been carrying since she arrived, the one she'd picked from someone's garden, slightly wilted by now, missing 2 petals. She put it in Marcus's hand. He held it like it was the most valuable thing in that garden. And in that moment it was. When was the last time a completely honest moment, a child's simple gesture, a truth too big to stay hidden, cut right through everything complicated and reminded you what actually matters? 1 section left. And I promise you, the thing you haven't seen coming yet is worth every minute you've spent here. The smallest people change the largest stories. They always have. 3 months passed. The kind of 3 months that do more work than most years. The Calloway story broke publicly, not in the tabloids first, but through a quiet legal proceeding that Gerald had attempted to suppress and failed. Elena, contacted by Marcus's lawyers, had agreed to DNA testing. The results came back in 6 weeks. Tomas was Gerald's son, not Marcus's. Marcus received those results in his lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon and sat for a long time without speaking. He didn't know, even afterward, exactly what he felt. Relief maybe. And something more complicated. A grief for the version of Elena he'd loved, for the young man across the country who'd grown up carrying a secret he didn't know he was carrying. He reached out to Elena. Carefully. Respectfully. Through their respective lawyers first, then a single email, then, after she said yes, a phone call that lasted 47 minutes. She was well. Tomas was well. He was 12 years old and obsessed with football and terrible at math and full of opinions about things. He was, by all accounts, extraordinary. "You deserved to know," Marcus told her. "A long time ago." "Yes," she said. "We both did." They weren't in love anymore. That ship had sailed in both directions a long time ago. But they were something. Survivors of the same wreckage. That counted for something. Vivian left the city. There was no dramatic scene. No final confrontation. She called Marcus once. He didn't pick up. She sent a message that said "I did love you" in my way. He read it. Didn't respond. He believed her, actually. He thought she probably had loved him, in the specific, contracted way that people love things they also need to control. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. But it was real, in its own diminished form. Gerald Calloway's story was not finished. Lawyers were involved, inheritance questions raised, Tomas's rights formally established, but that story belonged to other people to tell. Not Marcus's. Not anymore. Marcus focused on the only thing he could control. What came next? Rosa received a call on a Thursday 8 weeks after the wedding that wasn't. It was Marcus's assistant, asking if she would come in for a meeting. She came in expecting termination paperwork. Bringing everything full circle. She'd been tolerated as long as Vivian needed the house to run, and now perhaps the house would be sold, or the staff restructured, or any of the dozen polite corporate words for "you're no longer needed." She sat across from Marcus in the library, the room where she'd found the photograph, the room where Lily had once pulled it from behind a desk and slipped it into her little pocket. Marcus pushed a folder across the desk. Rosa opened it. She looked at it for a long time. "I don't understand," she said. "It's a property deed," Marcus said. "For the house on Meridian Street. 3 bedrooms. Good school district. Garden in the back. Mrs. Osei's 2 blocks away." Rosa stared at him. "Marcus, the household manager position is also available," he said. "If you want it. Salary increase, full benefits, flexible hours. You'd bring Lily here whenever you need to. No one will tell her she's not welcome." Rosa felt something happen in her throat that she didn't try to stop. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said simply. "That's not why I'm doing it." He was quiet for a moment. "She walked into that garden with a flower she'd picked from someone else's fence," he said, "and she changed everything. She didn't know what she was carrying. She just knew the nice man should have it back." He smiled, "The real one. Quiet one. I owe her a garden." 6 months later, Rosa stood in the kitchen of a house on Meridian Street, making coffee. Through the window, she could see the back garden. Not a Harrington estate garden, not manicured or curated or designed by anyone who charged by the hour. Just a real garden. Overgrown in some places. A bird feeder that Lily had picked out herself. Bright orange, shaped like a sunflower. Lily was outside. She had organized her stuffed animals along the garden wall, 7 of them in a line, and was explaining something to them with great seriousness and much gesturing. Rosa watched her. Thought about the wrinkled yellow daisy dress. The photo in the pocket. The flower offered up to a man at an altar with the complete, guileless generosity of someone who didn't know the rules about what was precious and what wasn't. Thought about what it meant, to be told you're not invited to someone's world, and to walk in anyway, not out of defiance, not out of spite, but just because love doesn't really understand the concept of uninvited. The coffee finished brewing. Rosa poured 2 cups. She put on her coat. She was expected at the estate by 9. The new position. The real one. She called through the kitchen window. "Lily. Time to go, baby." Lily looked up from her assembly of stuffed animals. Considered. "Can they come?" she asked, gesturing at the entire line. 3 of them, Rosa said. Lily deliberated with the gravity of a small general. Then she picked 3. The rabbit, the bear, the small knitted elephant that was missing one eye, and tucked them under her arm. She walked toward her mother. The gate she stopped, turned back, looked at the 4 stuffed animals still sitting on the garden wall. "I'll be back," she told them. Then she took her mother's hand, and they walked out into the morning. Here is what this story taught me. There are rooms in this world where certain people are told, quietly, politely, powerfully, that they don't belong. Rooms where the door is closed before they even reach it. Where they are judged not by their hearts but by their uniforms, their addresses, their children's wrinkled dresses and wilting flowers. And then there are children. Children who haven't learned yet to see those doors. Who walk through them with their pockets full of accidental truth and their arms full of flowers picked from strangers' gardens. Who don't know they're changing everything. They're just looking for their mama. Here is the question I want to leave in your mind tonight. What truth are you carrying in your pocket? Something small, something you don't even realize you have, that someone else desperately needs you to bring into the room. If this story moved something in you, if it lived somewhere in your chest for even a moment, then you already know what to do. Hit that like button. Not for the algorithm. For Lily. For Rosa. For every person who's ever been told they're not invited and walked in anyway. Drop a comment. Tell me, who does this story remind you of? Have you ever been the one who wasn't invited? Or the one who held the door? Subscribe if you want stories that stay with you. Stories that feel like something real. We're here every week, and we're building something worth being part of. And if you want another story that will stop your heart and rebuild it, the next one is already waiting for you. See you there.